For those of you who don't know me, my name's Lulu. I'm the head of teacher experience at Flint. Bit of a made-up role, but essentially I talk to a bunch of teachers and try and really just promote teacher learning of what Flint is, how we can make it better. Yeah, and that's why we're hosting these sorts of campfire sessions, where the entire goal is to give this space for you all to chat and learn from each other. And I'll also share what I know, but I feel like there's a couple of people in this room who probably know a bit more about using Flint in lower schools than I do. So yeah, we'll just give it a couple more minutes for some more people to hop on, and then I'll go ahead and get started. Great, I'll start sharing my screen. Also, I'll send a link to the slides in the chat for if anyone wants to follow along there. Let me know if that link doesn't work though. But yeah, awesome. This will also be recorded, so if anyone's like not here yet, they can watch the beginning. But yeah, today we're talking about lower schools, and generally just so everyone's like on the same playing field, I'll like go over activity creation and highlight some of the specific features for lower schools very quickly at the beginning. Then I'll talk about some like pro tips for using Flint in lower schools, looking more at like the implementation side and sharing some cool anecdotes about that. And then finally, we'll have our story time. And I just want to like give a quick shout out to Megan and Ty from Wesleyan and Westminster, respectively. They approached me with this whole idea, so thanks to them, we're here today and we can chat about this. So I'll probably also be picking on them a lot and asking them a bunch of questions. But yeah, quick things. So the recording will be available later. I'll send them out probably tomorrow morning, both the recording for today's session and yesterday's session on exam prep review. And questions are welcome. Feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But yeah, so when creating lower school activities, in general, if you're new to Flint, here are some of the like goals of our team. We're essentially wanting to give students more immediate and frequent feedback, personalized conversations for students based on their knowledge and interests, and then give you as teachers insight into student conversations and some oversight of how it's being used. And for lower schools in particular, we've seen a lot of positive use cases from like writing feedback to getting students like interested in a new topic, to building like different schema and empathy. So yeah, this is just like one testimonial that we've gotten from a teacher, and she was using it to give her students feedback about their writing. And she said that it freed her up to meet with students one-on-one, knowing that the rest of her students could also be getting feedback at the same time. So we're not like trying to replace you as teachers by any means. And I think especially in lower school, it's important that you all have your presence there. But we are trying to give that immediate feedback and give you some more options for how to guide students in your classroom. Yeah, so when it comes to customization in Flint, I'll show this in the platform in a second, but as an overview, for lower schools, the text-to-speech and speech-to-text, I would definitely recommend trying out at least, especially if your students are a bit more not as comfortable with typing yet. And then we can set also appropriate reading / grade levels in Flint. This is just like a proxy for how complicated the language should be. So that can also help with like lowering the level of text for your students. If you all use iPads or similar tablets. You can use QR codes with Flint. Any like web browsers usually can create a QR code for you. So that might be helpful if like the putting a link somewhere and then having students find it is difficult. And then also, of course, you can change the grading level in Flint to be something that fits maybe your classroom better. But yeah, let me hop into the Flint platform and show you all a quick overview of how to create an activity. In actually in the slides here, I've like put in a example learning objective. So yeah, within Flint, of course, you can use any of these shortcuts to create some activities for your students. The feedback on writing one might be helpful, especially if you're teaching English. But I think also for the lower schools, you might not exactly be having students debate yet or um, have them do problem solving practice. But I did see that there might be like a language teacher here. So there's also language speaking practice. But essentially, I'm going to show you how to create a custom activity just because it offers you more flexibility and creativity here. And so,
Lulu, we can't see your current screen share. We can only see your slides.
oh, my bad. Okay. Yes, these were the shortcuts that I was talking about. And then if you click on create custom activity, this is what we're doing now. But yeah, so in this objective, I'll put for Flint to help students research their favorite historical figure, then ask them to reflect on why they chose this person and what surprised them about their research. So when I sent out the registration questions, the research portion and the reflection portion were some of the like focuses that came up that people requested. So that's why I created this. But yeah, in this first step, this is also where you can select the grade level for your students. I'll just set like third grade to show you all what it looks like. Yeah, and in this part, you can also upload any of your own materials. And having those materials there will also give Flint an idea of what sort of language it should be working at, especially if you have your own like grading scale that you like to use. If you have a rubric that pertains to this activity and you can upload it, Flint will create its grading rubric off of that as well. Yeah, so I'm just gonna do this really quickly, but I'll click next, and then Flint will help brainstorm some activity types to accomplish that goal that we set there. So here there's a history heroes explorer, a time travel reporter, and a history detective chat. Maybe your students are interested in time travel more so than anything else. So we could do this one where students become reporters and investigate their favorite historical figure. And then at the end, students will share their findings and personal connections to their chosen historical figure through an interactive conversation. So clicking next here. The next portion of this is Flint creating a bunch of the settings for us. So once that's done, it actually automatically set the grading rubric to be more qualitative, which is great. But you can always like change this directly in here. And then for the language piece, it also automatically put it to writing or speaking and reading or listening. So students can use the text to speech and speech to text. Yeah. But of course, if you're trying it out on this right side or you're watching one of the previews by clicking on one of the buttons at the top here, you can ask for any changes that you deem necessary in the bottom left. So like something that someone suggested in the registration responses was to give Flint a personality. So let's say adopt the personality of a let's say detective from the 60s, and also make the grading rubric more fun for youngsters. And let's see what it comes up with. But yeah, any revision request can be really easily done here. So now it says, once it finishes writing, But it's going to make the initial prompt, well, what do we have here? Adjust Fedora. So sometimes like including that personality in the activity, especially for the younger students, can make it more engaging. Yeah. And it says the grading rubric ranges from super sleuth to detective in training, apprentice investigator, mystery not yet solved. But yeah, once you create this, you can copy this link and make a QR code from it and share it with your students. Yeah, so that's on the creation piece. I'll also really quickly touch on how you all shared that you were using Flint, created this little word cloud. But it seems like from the people who signed up for this call, a lot of people are using it for review and writing, which is great. Some people are using it for research and quizzes. And then there's like a bunch of other things around there too, like image generation, um, debates, even having interviews, writing theses. But yeah, and then mhm, okay, yeah, and then there's like some creation tips that everyone had pulled together as well. A couple of the ones that I want to highlight are number one under prompting. So developing more specific prompts and rules can be really helpful, especially if you're creating those custom activities. So in Flint, actually, if you go to your homepage, you'll have access to a very general chat with Flint. And in this bottom right chat, you can ask it to be your brainstorming partner. You can ask it to help you refine a prompt and be more specific. So that's like a tool that's readily available to you all. But yeah, feel free to use whatever you think works best. Yeah. Um, yeah. And like also under customization, taking your time, testing it out, pretending to be your student, that can be really helpful in figuring out what other parameters you might want to set in your activity. And yeah, asking guiding questions also and asking it to cover one question or one topic at a time can also be really helpful for the students. AI tends to be kind of wordy. So if you see it like presenting too much at once, you can tell it to like, hey, slow down, like don't respond with more than like a sentence with each like student response or something and try and get it to chill out a little bit. Yeah. I'll pause for quick questions right now. Are there any questions about like activity creation or these sorts of like tips for actually making the activity and setting it up?
I have a question. One thing I've noticed is that there's the AI suggested answers to the questions.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's a way to turn those off because they tend to limit student responses rather than sometimes more than, and I just haven't played with it. So is there an obvious button to press?
Yeah, no, you're good, you're good. Yeah. So the I think that's in this section. Yeah, at the very bottom of the activity behavior section of the settings, that's where you can delete all of these. And then you can also turn off subsequent suggestions that will like pop up throughout the conversation. Yeah, so if you don't want that for your students, yeah, of course you can turn it off. It can be a little distracting, I assume, for younger students. But yeah, we've seen like some teachers try and use this as a way to show students how to ask good questions to the AI. So maybe if you're like creating an activity where students are like supposed to research and it's very open ended and there's not like a right or wrong answer, it would make sense there. But yeah, if you're like trying to help them review something or um, doing more of like a structured thing, I agree. Yeah, it might be good to turn it off. But yeah, again, that's an behavior at the bottom. Good question. Any other questions before we move on to the section on how to use it more so in your classroom?
I, if no one else is jumping in, I do have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, is there an easy way without always structuring it within the query to create low reading level, high interest? So when you have second language learners, older students with lower reading levels for some reason, just asking it to use a lower reading level often simplifies the content as well to a level that's not interesting to that particular set of users.
That's a good question. I haven't heard any specific tips for that, but I think if you're like more, if you add more clarity into your objective that that's like something that you want, then it might help. Yeah, if you test it out, let me know how it goes. But I think Flint pulls like primarily from the objective when it's setting it up. So if you're more specific in your objective and like maybe even if you can give it some examples, that might be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean that I've created it within the query each time, but it'd be great to have a slide like how we pick the reading level. It would
Mhm.
actually be great to be able to pick the grade level as well separately, so
Mm,
that often is a case where you have learners who are reading at a different grade level than their grade level. And so there'd be like a built-in way to do it would be really useful instead of having to recraft that each time in the query.
I see. Okay, yeah, yeah. We've also seen some teachers like go rogue in a sense of like not using the grading level or the grade level of your students. So if you think your students are like not at that level, then you can set it to something else. The students won't see it. Um, and it's really just used as like a proxy for the reading level in English, at least. If you're trying the ACTFL levels for like the um, language learning, then that's like actually based on standards. But for the grade level, that's more so like on the average expected reading level for that grade. Great. Thanks, Sohan, for answering the questions in the chat. But yeah, so when it comes to actually like using Flint in the classroom, these are just like some of the examples that I've heard. And then in the story time, I'm sure other people will add to this. But yeah, having Flint as a tool so that you as the teacher can act as a rotating facilitator has been like a common thread. Um, Not just within lower school, but also beyond lower school. But these are like two quotes from lower school teachers that I've heard. This first one, I unfortunately do not remember the name of the person, but I met them at Westminster. But they said something along the lines of like, before, instead of having a long line of students waiting to show her their writing and so that she could like give them that feedback, she can now have them talk to Flint and then she can meet with specific students one on one without like the pressure of like, oh, there's like 10 other students waiting to see me. And similarly, Carrie from Harker, she like in this more specific quote was talking about how she finished her narrative writing unit and then what she uploaded into Flint was her editing checklist. And then she had her students all talk with Flint to do that editing practice. And she got really excited because initially she just gave them 30 minutes, but then they were so into it that they asked her to extend it. Yeah, so really like leveraging Flint as almost like your teaching assistant or someone who could be like an editing partner for the students can help a lot. And beyond writing, this can also be like when you're having the students review something or practice something, or even when you're having students like be introduced to a new topic. We've seen teachers use Flint for that, and then you as the teacher can like go back in and see like, oh, within this topic, the students are like really interested in X, Y, Z, and then that could maybe help guide how your next lessons should go. Um, yeah, and then if you're wanting to explore options beyond the one-to-one kind of structure, we've also seen a lot of group work done in Flint, especially at the lower grades. So one idea that I heard a couple times was like having Flint as one of the rotation stations as students are working on a larger project. Um, yeah, and for example, I think this example is from Megan actually, who's on this call, but an introduction to Flint, especially if your students like aren't quite familiar with what AI is and what it does yet, could be working with a Flint chat as a group. So you could like put it up on a screen as a class. You can like figure out what responses you should say to it and then see how it responds back to you. And then that gives you like more of a level of control of like talking to all of the students about like each response and like thinking critically about how the AI is giving you information. Yeah, and then there's like this example from NJIS in Jakarta where students were like grouped together around one laptop and asking Flint, who is supposed to be a science tutor, about various endangered species. There's like a whole article on there if you want to read it. Yeah, and then also with younger students, of course, we want to encourage their critical thinking and also their self-advocacy. So this was like a cool example that I've seen, I think also from Megan, um, about how she set up a Padlet for her students, and whenever they saw something that like either like they hadn't learned yet or they're like confused about, or if they think Flint like gave them a wrong answer, they could take a screenshot of that, put it into the Padlet, and then that would become like a final thing to wrap up the discussion with, like, oh, let's look through like all of the things that people are questioning. And that was like a good way of having the entire class as a whole talk about like when should we be thinking critically about what Flint gives us? How do we like fact check it? And yeah, AI can be wrong too. So we shouldn't just like take it at face value. And then yeah, if you're new to AI, I would also suggest like maybe trying out the parts of Flint that aren't quite so student facing also. Yeah, the more you use AI, the better you'll be at understanding it. And then I think the better you can make activities for your students. But yeah, so like I've made a bunch of like bots to help me like write various things or like review things that I've created as well. But you could create like a songwriting activity, one that helps you with lesson planning, activity ideation. I'm actually working with Megan on one where it's helping to ideate activities at different levels of AI use based on their school's AI policy. So you can get like as specific as that or just like have it help you introduce more fun into your classroom. Yeah. Any questions about the implementation of Flint?
I just had a really you sparked an idea to create an activity that intentionally Flint will give incorrect answers mixed in with correct answers to make the students verify that the answers are correct. Whether that's a social studies or language or math-based one, like forces them like and tell the students ahead of time. Some of these will be right, some will be wrong. You actually have to verify them. So I'm kind of
Yeah,
excited
yeah,
about that.
yeah. That's a good idea. Throw them some curveballs.
Same thing with our digital literacy. Like we're uploading a link that we know has fictitious information and showing them exactly that so that they become more skeptical users who are really analyzing what they got. So we're on the same page. Like we want them to be skeptical and reflective. So we're building in things by connecting erroneous info.
Very nice. Great, awesome. Yeah, so we can hop into our story time section of this session. So I've like prepared a bunch of questions, but also if there are questions that are more pressing to you all, we can also go over those. I've tried to like pull this from the registration. But yeah, I guess the first one is like, what sorts of activities have you all been using Flint for? Is there anyone who wants to like share one that like really stood out to them that they tried with their students?
Well, if no one else is jumping in, sorry. I feel like my voice has been very present, but I also am one of those people like, yeah, fill space. A couple things. My fifth graders do a year-long passion project in a library tech. I'm a tech integrationist and I work with a library teacher. And building a thesis is a big step for fifth graders. And it's been one of the harder like pieces to get moving. And so it became so much easier when I built and now refined this year a Flint activity that helps them hone in on a good thesis statement. They start with telling it the topic, and if they have a thesis statement they're currently working on, and then it asks them guiding questions around things that it doesn't understand or thinks aren't clear enough. originally it would just give them one, and it was really long and complicated. And so I really refined it to be like guide them towards building a better thesis statement by asking questions. And that was really powerful for the fifth graders. The level of thesis statements this year is significantly better than it's ever been. So
Nice.
We're using it in a variety of ways. Our fifth grade teachers are primarily using it as brainstorm and revision helpers. In the same way for our writing has improved. The kids write like an additional chapter to a book with a missing voice, and getting them to think about the character before they start writing and having it kind of like help them. We always get action-packed stories, but this time around we got better emotional arcs along with the action because they had created these back stories before even entering into the writing process. So that was awesome. We're using it like in some science classes. Our class times have dwindled down from 60 minutes to 50 minutes. So one science teacher does a whole like animals unit where they actually raise centipedes and horseshoe crabs and things of that nature. So the kids are inputting their scientific data, and then Flint is working with them to create a narrative from the animal's point of view. So we're creating kind of books that pair the scientific research with kind of a narrative fictional character account. And in design thinking, I will say it's been a great way of taking very deep articles that the kids couldn't handle at their level and getting them to upload and ask it for help in that way. And also we've been doing surveys to build empathy. And so taking in that survey, they've learned that they can upload their survey data and then have it spit out empathy maps or user personas. And so when we're looking at 25 people in a survey, but then narrowing it down to 2 or 3 personas, like it's been very helpful to get them to condense work time, what would take us 2 or 3 classes into a 1 class sort of thing. We have loads and loads of applications now. Like the sky's the limit at this point.
Thanks, Ty. Actually, to dig in a little bit there, so you like talked about how you're using it with the fifth graders. Like, I guess because you work with like teachers all across lower school, how has the difference between the grade levels looked?
Um, well, I have to say, like my fifth grade teachers dove into this very quickly, and so I have more like experience watching them with the students. But we're starting to get first and second grade teachers using it for smaller ideas. And I would say that like that helpfulness button, like we use the full helpfulness for our second graders as they're thinking of things. They're currently thinking about biography projects, and the teachers are saying like they want the kids to think outside of what they already know. So Flint is interviewing them and asking more questions about them so they can take the kids' personal likes and interests and hobbies and then spit out a group of 5 to 6 diverse people so that they have like a broader pool to choose from when they choose their biography subject. So I would just say like for the younger grades, what we're seeing is more hand holding Flint as a thinking partner, using the speaking function way more. We love the option to like lower the speed because when our first and second graders are practicing their skip counting or this or that, like we're actually able to record them, hear it back later when we're not like literally right there. So I would say like it's more limited in scope for our younger grades, where our upper grades, like we want it to have the robustness of a teacher sitting right next to them without sitting right next to them.
Makes sense.
And I will say, I'm sorry, I'm now taking the time, Dan.
You're good.
Say that, I mean, we were really looking at it as activities for students, but now I've been creating activities for teachers, which was kind of mind blowing. So one group said we use decodables all the time, but we want to be able to edit the text. So we create an activity where this teacher just goes in and it asks them like, what reading level do you want? How many pages of text? What rules do you need? What sight words do you want? So it guides them through like 6 or 7 questions and then spits out the decodable text for them, along with prompts they can put into Canva to create pictures. And so like I'm trying to also get the teachers to think about what are the things you do most routinely in your classroom? What are you constantly having to type in over and over? And now we're creating activities that are teacher facing, which I don't think we had originally kind of wrapped our mind around.
Nice. And also, just to show a couple of the like features that Ty touched on. So within the settings, under language, there's also the speaking rate. So if you find like the text to speech is like too fast, you can lower it a bit and have it like talk slower for your students. And then the other thing was the helpfulness level in activity behavior. Yeah, so this one it automatically set it to full because it's like a you're researching kind of activity. But yeah, so this is like how much guidance it will give the students. Yeah, which as Ty mentioned, it is probably helpful to adjust from time to time. Great. Any other stories of how people have been using Flint with their kids?
I can share. So I've used it in a few different ways. I think right now in math, I have an activity going where we're investigating fractions. I teach fourth grade, and we are investigating for some of my students who need a challenge how fractions can be applied in real life. And so I'm also kind of simultaneously really working with students on building their understanding of prompting, of AI prompting. So I created an activity that was sort of open-ended where Flint would take on the kind of role play for any person or character that the student prompted for, if that makes sense. So I gave them the choice of what would you like to research. A lot of them are choosing how fractions show up in sports or dance or what have you. And so they are practicing going into Flint, into this activity, and then prompting Flint to then walk them through how are fractions used as if you are a, football like announcer, or if you are a dance coach, like how are you using fractions in your life? So we're trying to build their muscle of advocating and working with the AI and seeing it as a collaboration tool, as well as the research base and the practice of the fractions concepts we're doing in class. So that's kind of an activity I've seen in math class. In social studies recently, I think speaking into the group work aspect, they were tasked with creating some kind of project that explained the effects of the French and Indian War, which is what we've been studying. And so the groups actually collaborated with Flint to help them create ideas for how they could present the information. So they kind of worked again on that dialogue with the AI chat. So I think that produced, I think someone was saying earlier how it kind of produces a lot deeper and more complex work than what we would have seen before. I think that was a great example of that. So seeing some of that, just generally working on the prompting. There's a lot of activities that kids are using where it sort of puts them in scenario-based activities. So you're an owner of a pizza shop, and now you have to work on multiplication and division and that kind of stuff. But I'm really interested in learning more about ways to prompt like the error analysis and the critical thinking, which it sounds like a lot of other people are doing. So I'm really grateful to be learning from y'all today.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So like the second question that I had was what was helpful for when you initially introduced your students to Flint? Especially because I know there's like some teachers here who are like just starting to dip their toes in. So was there anything that was like useful in like teaching students about what AI is or how to use Flint? Any of that?
Yeah, I can share that again. So our school has an AI policy that's been set. I think a lot of schools do, kind of work together in committees, created this policy. It starts at grade 4 and goes from grade 4 through grade 12 at our school. And then after that, when we were introducing AI and Flint specifically at the 4th grade level, because it's the first time that they'll be hearing it from school, we created, and I think I saw Allison on the call, Allison and I created a presentation that just walked them through what AI is, understanding prompting, understanding how a large language model works, just kind of giving them that foundation. So we sort of explicitly taught that to them. And then we did, as you were mentioning earlier, Lulu, the whole class kind of modeled activities with them, and they caught on really quickly, which kids do with technology. They caught on really fast. And so really it just took that maybe one or two times of us supporting them in that way before they're now able to log in with no problem, collaborate with the modules that we create, and they feel really comfortable with it. So, but we did explicitly create a presentation that really explained not only what Flint is, how to use it, but also our expectations and roles as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and I think to pick on Ty a little bit, I think she mentioned in the registration that she's exploring how to like teach students about like what an LLM is and what AI is without using technology even for like the younger grades, like first to second grade. I don't know if you like have anything to speak about that on yet, Ty, but
Well, we were just thinking in third grade, talking to them about how just like one of the teachers joked around. I was like, telling them that, how LLMs are working to go out and find information. And the question is, do you want to cheat off sorry, this is just the example. Would you rather cheat off the most popular person in class or the smartest person in class? And I think that that's a really valuable kind of way to start thinking about it, and sending kids and thinking about, well, like, it's sending things everywhere, and it's more likely to pull in information that's frequently posted as opposed to like necessarily the most popular information. So we're talking about looking at citations, especially with our fourth and fifth graders, seeing where the information is being pulled in from. But with even the younger grades, we start with some activities like, I'm sure everyone's done something like this in their morning meetings, where you start with the sentence of the story, and then you pass the paper, and then the next kid writes the next sentence, and you keep going. And we talk about how that ties into predictive versus generative AI. Like, so getting them to see some of that information. And I will say that Georgia Tech has a program. I think it's PAIZ. I don't know how they pronounce it, but they even have things like getting the kids to look at, and it's so cute. It's like faces of dogs versus faces of muffins, and like that kind of stuff. Like getting the kids to see the fallibility, but also how it's scanning information. So I know that that wasn't a great like. I am trying to refocus even in our school about how we can do this in a logical, predictable way, and not like the scattershot ways we've been introducing. So I'm taking all these little nuggets of things that have worked in different places, and embedding it into our third, fourth, and fifth grade, thinking of expanding digital literacy, digital citizenship to include AI literacy. So sorry, that was a scattershot, but knowing like we're working on how do we consolidate this and make sure that everyone's getting the groundwork in a way. Like I'm looking at Megan's her school's thing, and I'm like, oh, I wish we had started out with that 2 years ago. So yeah, we're still working it out, but trying to do it very hands off tech in third grade, bringing in fourth grade to talk about more of the computer analytics of it. And fifth grade, I will say one thing that maybe hasn't been mentioned yet is like kids don't know how to talk back to Flint yet. They don't know how to challenge it. It's not intuitive. They kind of just take what's given, hook, line, and sinker. So we're having to tell them, like, we did a unit where it was talking about Civil War, and it kept calling people slaves. And in our building, we use people first language. So one of the first things I did was say, like, hey, if it says slave, talk back to it and say, we use people first language. Could you please rephrase? Or, I think the reading level is too much for me, or you're asking me too many questions at one time. So I do think that needs to be put in, like the talk about not just being skeptical, but how to disagree and how to get the output that you want.
Yeah.
That happened.
I love that, Ty. That reminds me of what we just did yesterday in class. It was really interesting. We were doing that same thing where we were talking about, here's your activity we're doing in Flint. You're gonna, be whatever the activity was. But I said, what happens if you feel like the questions you're being given are too easy? And all of the kids very easily said, I can ask Flint, can you please give me more challenging questions? And we kind of walk through, what does that challenge look like if you're multiplying by, this or that, like how can you make that harder? But then I said, what happens if the questions feel too hard? What should you do? And every child was like, we should ask it to make it easier. And I was like, no, we don't ask it to make it easier. We just ask it to help support you as you work towards the level where you should be. And they were all like, oh, that makes total sense. So we actually talked about sentence starters and sentence frames that just really helped them phrase that. And I think that really not only is helpful with Flint and with AI, but just in life, right? Like, how do you phrase asking for help? So that's a really great point. I think that's something that we're seeing more and more. I've actually written into my project, the pizza project that I was just talking about, actually wrote in specific sentences for students to put themselves into Flint that kind of prompts them through the activities so they start to build that muscle. But I love that. That's a great connection.
I also found early on students, when they didn't get what they wanted, would ask the same exact question and they would get the same exact response. And now with adults, we can parse that they actually want a different response, but the AI is like, you ask the same question, I'll give you the same response. So teaching them how to move on from a question that's not getting them what they want and ask a different or new question has been a real interesting step, because they have a learned behavior pattern of just asking the same question 800 times. So.
For sure. Yeah. That's adorable. But yeah, okay. So I have like two other questions, but I also want to like check if there's any questions that any of you all wanted to ask. This is your time. Don't want to like gear it in a way if that's like not what you all are looking for right now.
I've seen Wesleyan's AI policy and would love if anyone has an AI policy that works for their lower school students. If anyone's willing to share that in the chat, I'd love to collect a variety of examples.
Yeah. I just connected with one school in New York, not specifically to like lower school, but I thought the way that they approached their policy was very interesting. So they have like, she showed me a chart of like all the different things that AI can help with based on like the different tasks that students are doing. So for example, from like writing, it might be like thesis generation and then like outlines and then um, feedback, editing. So like all of those, they were planning on for each of them creating another chart that's like embedded in that shows like, okay, for each step of this process, what are you allowed to use AI for and what are you not allowed to use AI for? And then they would want the teachers to think about their learning goals and if it's something that AI can help to approach those learning goals and like get closer to, then they would encourage the teachers to put a check mark next to that saying that students can use AI for that piece of it. But then like if it's like shortcutting, then it might be an X. And like for each like activity, it might be different. And so just like that like super granular clarity of like, okay, we're doing a writing assignment. This is when you're creating your outline. For your outline with these steps, you can use AI or like you can't use AI. I wish I had the visual for you, but that's like the process that they were looking at it with. So maybe like I thought that clarity would be like super helpful for like any level of student. Maybe that's like something to consider.
This part of the conversation is making me think that I either want to or there might already be activities in Flint to teach students at different developmental levels how to query Flint. And I don't know if those exist in a library already or people have made them, but it would be really great to build in all the stuff we talked about, like asking for harder, asking for more support, reframing your question, like that series of skills. Be great to have an activity that drives that. Has anybody made that already?
Um, I can look in the templates library
In the
after this
elementary
call.
level?
Right. We should really add like filtering for grade level into our templates library. But yeah, once we have that, I'll let you all know. But yeah, I'll take a look in the templates library to see if there's something like that. Because I know that there's some that are a bit meta that people have posted into there. If not, I can try and make one too. So Yes. I'll email you all after this and include it in there.
Because it'd be awesome for them to use the tool to learn the tool.
Exactly. Great. So the next question I had, also kind of broad and also was like included in the registration, but like what have you all learned as you've gotten more experience setting up Flint activities, and like what has been super helpful? I know I touched on like a couple of them, but if anyone wanted to like elaborate on something that they wrote or add something that they just remembered.
I have to say one of the most helpful things, and to give a shout out to you, Lulu, and to Sohan, is like every time I can't find something or a teacher comes to me and says, how do I? And it's not there. Like when we reach out to you guys, we get such quick replies, and I can say that things that we were asking for at the end of last year have shown up. Not only that, like I'm on the Facebook group, and like anything I ask within 24 hours. So I have to say that that has been one of the things I have learned. Like I don't have to struggle and flounder or have someone else do it. Like you guys are so responsive that I don't have any fears about asking for what I think we need or can't find or need help.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I always encourage teachers to ask as many questions as possible. You're not bothering us, please. This is like really helpful for our team as well. Because like transparently, our team doesn't have any educators on it, so that's why we like our bread and butter, something like that. The thing that we focus on is we want to gather as much feedback and as many perspectives as possible, and that can only help us to like figure out what the product still needs and where it can grow.
And the second part is like the rule writing, understanding how to prioritize your rules because it does matter. And so that has been a learning process from my teacher's side, like them understanding that rule writing has to have a certain technique, and they're learning the verbiage behind it, and how to get what they want.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I don't know if you all saw the news, but we switched from GPT to Claude. And one of the things that prompted that switch, yay, I see some cheers. One of the things that prompted that switch was that we were noticing that GPT was ignoring our rules a lot. And we were like, please, we've written it in so many different ways and we think it's really clear. But yeah, Claude should hopefully follow rules a bit better. Excited to hear what you all experience with that. We've seen some positive signs, but of course, like I'm sure there's things that we can adjust in the prompting as well to make it better. But yeah, for sure. I think the clarity in what you put into Flint is super important in what gets put out. When I was talking to, I forget which school it was, but they were telling me how like one of the things that they learned over time was that as teachers would come to like the administrators like, oh, Flint isn't like giving feedback in the way that I would, or like the AI isn't like responding in the way that I would, but then they would like look at the settings and be like, oh, well, you weren't clear in your rubric really about like what your expectations are. Like the AI doesn't have that like direct connection to your brain yet, so you have to like give it as much of the context as possible and like be super clear in what exactly it is that you're looking for and what your expectations for those criteria are as well.
I have teachers that are developing their own little documents about things that they say in class so that they can upload it to Flint to make it sound like them. So like I say, oh boogers when I make a mistake. So now Flint says, oh boogers in my, style. And that can be done. Like the more you can attach or upload, makes it more unique to yourself. So it is clever how that sort of thing can work out.
Yeah, almost like attaching more of your own humanness, I guess, into the AI. Great. Yeah, anything else to add on like the setup portion? If anyone wants to chat about it.
Do you upload that information each time you create an activity, or do you have it as like It'd be interesting if you could upload documents that are kind of persistent and say refer to this document instead of having to upload it each time, and it would be super incredible if you could point it to a live document that would pull the most recent version.
Up to now, we've just downloaded, like we keep a Google Doc, we download it as a PDF and upload it each time. I also have teachers who are starting to keep spreadsheets of like, this is my student, this is the reading level, this is the math level, this is their hobbies and likes, and so that they can pull it in for math problems or personalized reading. But no, we're having to upload it each time.
I was also we had a faculty meeting yesterday for one of the divisions, and I had thought, because I'm not a classroom teacher anymore, but when I was, I kept a document of all those really hard won comments that I created on report cards. You know, those ones that I crafted for hours. And I would just keep a document that had a bunch of those over time, because so I could like work on those. And I was thinking, oh my God, if I was still doing that part of the work, because I, thank goodness, don't have to write reports anymore, I would have put that in and have it help generate, because like, use my voice from this document. And this is the specific thing I want to say. That would be a really powerful tool that would cut down immense amounts of time.
Yeah, and especially then you can focus on like the content of what you want it to say rather than like the specific diction that you use for this one sentence. Yeah, that's been a really popular use case we've heard.
I have a question going back to what Ty said. If I created a spreadsheet with the students' names and had like their interests and things in it, and I uploaded that, would Flint be able to read that spreadsheet to match the name of the student to the name of the student who is working on the individual activity? Does that make sense? So if they're logging in through Clever and it's using their Wesleyan email, and I have uploaded a sheet that has their first and last name in it, would Flint be able to match that and pull the information from that spreadsheet? So if child 1 likes baseball but child 2 likes basketball, they'd be able to differentiate it that way?
I think so. Flint does like know the name of the student, so you might just like want to add in the objective, like this is what this spreadsheet is for. It's not just like data that you want Flint to look like, but it's like, hey, here's context that I want you to know about my students. But yeah, Ty, did you hear anything about like how well it worked?
I haven't done, well, I mean, I haven't set up activities in that way. The teachers are using it more for the teacher-focused activities, like creating 5 math problems in this style, but 5 for each kid. So I'm really now interested to see if it'll work in that capacity, so that when they enter the activity, it's already personalized in a different way for them.
Well, I'm thinking
Well,
I'm thinking that if they upload that spreadsheet and then Flint knows, I mean, I'm picking on sports today, but Flint knows that child 1 likes basketball. If the child says, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the problem, can you explain it to me in a different way? If it would pull from, it's just like in basketball when you have this, like, I'm wondering if it would prompt it to make that connection.
I feel like if you put it in the rules, it sounds feasible.
Oh.
Because even the worst case scenario, it could start off by asking the student their name, and then it automatically would pull from your attached doc. So even if it doesn't do it without prompting, if you set your rule up, tell me your name, and then from there on, it's pulling from that line.
Yeah. And I think Allison, I'm not trying to call you out here on the call, but I think I see your name on here. Is that something that we can upload that still protects privacy in school? Sorry, Allison.
Sorry. Clearly my camera, let me turn off the camera to not distract everyone. It's something I would have to look into, just because that data privacy isn't technically my department. We would have to talk with IT.
Yeah.
But I think it would be okay. It's just we have to look at all the rules associated with it.
Okay.
Yeah, from our end, I think it would be okay, but Allison, I think you should still check with your IT department to double check everything. But because like Flint isn't using that data to train any models and it's not like sending it out anywhere, it's like all going to be just locally used within that one activity. My thought would be that it is okay, but maybe there's like some like gray area of like if a student uses another student's name. when they start off the activity. I don't know. So yeah.
I will say, like, I did have the head of IT sitting in when we were talking about this, and he gave us the blessing. So, like, I did check in for those same kind of privacy reasons.
Nice.
Do you think, or have you had the students like fill out a Google form of their interests and stuff? Like you could actually pre-populate this with their own shared elicited stuff.
Many of our teachers do that at the beginning of the school year. So yeah, we definitely do pull from that.
I love this idea. I'm so excited about that.
And that's why we wanted everyone to come together, because we're like, we know there's other people out there.
That's the way that I feel like when the kids, make the connections the best when you're pulling from something that they know really well or really like well, but I just don't know enough about all the different activities that they're doing to be knowledgeable enough sometimes to do that. So I feel like I don't know enough about horseback riding to be able to make that connection in a way that they'll understand. That's exciting.
Yeah. Awesome.
To that end, some of us are putting our contact info in the chat so we can stay in touch if anybody else wants to join in on that.
Yes, please do. Please do. I'm going to share. Oh,
I just, in the staying connected piece, if somebody, I mean, I can do this or anybody else can do this. It'd be nice to like make a Google group instead of like a email chain or something. If someone would be wanting to host that, maybe even Flint, I don't know. Then we can like store docs and do a group thing instead of like group email things tend to fall apart and be unwieldy.
Yeah, I can look into that. Sounds good. So just so we can do this like before we officially call time, I'm gonna share like some concluding resources. Yeah, and then we can continue the conversation if you all want. I have all the time in the world, but it's up to you all. I know you all are busy. But yeah, we do have some examples on our website of like elementary school use cases. They're not like, it's not as broad in terms of like number of use cases that we have. But here you can like filter for like what might be good for third grade or fourth grade, fifth grade. And there's just like some examples of activities that teachers have created, and we've written about like what their teaching goals were. There's even like in this like learning objective section, you can like click on these and get the oh, my bad. I keep forgetting to change the tab. But yeah, in this use cases library, it's different from the templates because there's like more writing about it, and you can like filter actually for the grade levels. And within like each of these, we like kind of talk about like the customization that the teacher did, the student experience. Yeah, so if you're just getting started, this might be a good resource for getting some initial inspiration. And then, yeah, we do have like one more campfire session this semester. We're doing like a Spotify inspired 2024 Flint Wrapped to kind of cover all of the updates that have come to the platform over this year. Yeah, and there's the QR code, I believe, to sign up for the like Flint Campfire Sessions calendar. I'm thinking we can try and do like a lower school call at least once a semester, if not like every like other month or something. But yeah, happy to like match that cadence to what you all think would be helpful. But yeah, again, thanks for joining. If there's more questions, I'm happy to stay here and speak to them if I can. And yeah, drop your contact information in the chat if you want to stay connected with everyone. Oh, I'll also put my email in here in case any of you all need to reach me.
If I could make one more plea to have the templates searchable by grade as well, or at least by grade level, because right now it's so like search science, biology, physics, chemistry. It is like so. It's if there are a lot of lower school things, it's incredibly hard to find.
Yeah. hopefully that should be easy to do. I do know our engineers are in a cave right now because they're like preparing this big new update for you all. Hopefully to come within. Actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to promise, but it should be within the next 2 months, if not within the next month. But yeah, so after that, I'll like push them to prioritize searching for templates.
I would also ask, and this is a thing many tech platforms do, big updates are amazing and lovely and add functionality. And when they happen around big reporting times or end of semesters or other things, they become incredibly disruptive along with adding all that lovely features. So, and you may be doing this already, but really being mindful of the rhythm of the school year is very helpful in education directed tech platforms. There's nothing like going to a lesson and having all the materials you just created completely useless because the platform changed completely. And you're like, never mind. None of my slides point you to the right things. Let's just do this on the fly.
I know. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, this one, usually when we have like super big updates like that, we like do give a heads up, like, hey, this is like how it's going to change. This is more like a process of creating an activity, might be different, but it's not a regression per se. We're just like adding on top of it. So hopefully you all will be okay. I believe in you. But great. Any final questions, thoughts? If not, like, have a great week.
Thank you so much for hosting this.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. I'll send the recording out tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.